Did the millions of people in India use Office on mobile for productivity? And the answer was no. People are getting stuff done on their mobile every day. They're being extremely productive without using Office, right? And like Office was supposed to be the productivity suite that people would use. This is something that's clearly a gap. We aren't participating in this. And people were using WhatsApp to get work done. And we had these insights that we synthesized over time that work gets done on chat. The groups are flat. It's very democratic. Committing to a new chat app is a big thing. But should we do this when there's WhatsApp? And then like in 4 weeks, but we had something working. Now looking back and seeing the growth of Teams, it's really played out very well for Microsoft.
When you look at a large product such as Microsoft Office, Google Docs, anything which has been around for several years, one of the assumptions that we have is that it was built in a very linear way, like somebody thinks of a feature, places it on the product, and so on and so forth. But what you'd be surprised to know is oftentimes it's not linear. In fact, most of the times it's never linear. You look around for like what fits in, you look around for what other things which are, say, often ancillary, often supplementary, which might be solving the core user problem that you want to solve through this product or through the journeys that this product is touching in a user's life. Today, we have one such non-linear journey. Kaizala is the product that we're going to talk about, which is essentially now a part of Microsoft Teams. So if you've used Microsoft Teams for work, for education, for personal reasons, there is a likelihood that you have probably used this product as well. I'm very excited to chat with Arun Rajappa, who is going to be our guest for today's episode. And he's one of the finest product managers I know of personally. Worked at Microsoft, also worked at Google for a very brief period, and currently he's a country manager at Riot Games. So please join me in the next few minutes when Arun will talk to us about how exactly they figured out what are the needs of an Indian small and medium business users, what exactly are the ways and methodologies of how they do business, and how that all kind of got together with the larger Microsoft Teams as we know of it today. Because end of the day, any good product always ensures that the end user goal is being met. How they achieve it, how they do their business, all of that might differ. But then the goal is what you really need to nail when you're building a great product. So very excited to join this episode with Arun Rajappa. Welcome to the show. Really excited to have you join us today.
Yeah, Shreyas, it's really great to be here. I think I've been looking forward to this. We've, of course, worked together in the past a little bit, and I'm looking forward to the conversation today as well.
So let's get into your world from, we're today talking about the Microsoft world and something which you incubated and brought to life and all that. So can you talk to me about like what is Kaizala? What is the product? Can you just lay the groundwork for me?
Yeah, I'll give you a little bit of background context as well, and maybe a little bit of personal context. I used to be in Microsoft, from 2003 till probably about 2013. So I spent about 10 years at Microsoft, and then left to do my own startup. And then, the startup, it was like as startups are, it can be challenging. And I also had like a lot of challenges on the home front with parents not being well and so on. And it was almost serendipitous because at about that time, when I was thinking, what do I do next? I was approached by Prashant from Microsoft. I think both of us know Prashant, our old manager in some sense. And so Prashant reached out saying, hey, what are you up to these days? We are doing this interesting set of mobile incubations. I know you've been working on mobile products in your startup. So what's happening? And I was like, okay, this is coincidence, but it's good. So we ended up chatting, and I was very excited by this idea of incubating products on, for the mobile, for Android and iPhone back in Microsoft. To tell you a little bit about why I was sort of excited about that, right? And I mean, this is kind of just rewinding the clock a little bit, but you think 2015, and it's probably even true today to a large part, and we'll talk about the exception, but in 2015, you think Microsoft on mobile, what were the products that Microsoft was like, totally rocking it on mobile? And yeah, Office to some extent, but did the millions of people in India use Office on mobile for productivity? And the answer was no, right? And so it felt very obvious to us sitting in India, in the India Development Center in Hyderabad, that people are getting stuff done on their mobile every day, day in and day out. They're being extremely productive without using Office, right? And like Office was supposed to be the productivity suite that people would use. And so we were like, okay, this is something that's clearly a gap. We aren't participating in this productivity that's happening on the mobile already. And so the thing that interested me was, how do we help build out a suite of products that help people be more productive on their mobile devices. And as part of that journey, I came back to Microsoft, and we had like multiple very good ideas, I think, looking back. The first product that we incubated was something called Aloha was the code name, but it was called Connections when we released it. And that had the whole thesis of how do we help small and medium businesses manage their customers on just using a mobile phone, right?
Yeah.
The second product was Sprightly, which was, again, with this idea of how do we help small and medium businesses manage their catalogs, manage their marketing collateral on just creating that just using a mobile phone. And the third was Kaizala, which was, the tagline was get work done on chat. But really the idea was, how do we help people who today use WhatsApp, or today as in 2015 use WhatsApp to get work done? How do we make them more productive, right? Because we saw WhatsApp all around us, and we knew that people were getting work done on WhatsApp, but we felt that there were some gaps. So these were the three products that we incubated: Connections, or Aloha, Sprightly, and Kaizala. So that's kind of the background, but we can go more into Kaizala if you want.
No, totally. And also the reason why I was so interested in Kaizala, I saw it from a go-to-market side at one point, and I know how much of like push there was towards finding that productivity angle. So in fact, that brings me to a question, Arun. When we say, at least from a Microsoft perspective, or while you were still PMing this product, right? What was your definition, or more importantly, what was, in your opinion, the gap that WhatsApp did not fill, or the void that WhatsApp did not fill, right? In terms of a productivity lens.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and we did a ton of research around this. One of the things I feel so good and so proud about Kaizala, like even after like 8-9 years, is the sort of customer focus and research that we spent a lot of time on. So we ended up meeting about 500 small and medium businesses across all of Connections and Sprightly and Kaizala, and just observing day in the life, doing interviews, understanding workflows that people were using. And when I say small and medium businesses, just to clarify that, this was carpentry shops, this was salons, this was designers who would have like 3 people in their office. So most of them were less than maybe 5 or 5 to 10 people in the business. And we met a number of these businesses, specifically on Kaizala and looking at WhatsApp. So we observed, as course of these interviews, that people were using WhatsApp to get work done. And we had these insights that we synthesized over time. Let's see whether I still remember them. It's 9 years gone by, but I used to be able to get up and say this in my sleep.
I was still very impressed. 9 years, you remember stuff I don't remember from yesterday.
So I think the first, which seems very basic, but it's really a powerful insight, is that work gets done on chat, right? And again, in the Microsoft context of Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and that's where work gets done. This was almost like throwing a stone into into a greenhouse, trying to say, hey, it's work is getting done on chat in India, and everybody is doing work on chat, right? So that was a big one. It was very obvious, but an important one. And of course, as you know, and we'll talk about, this is before Teams, and this is before any of these other apps. So I think first was work gets done on chat. The second insight we had, or the gap that we saw, is that work is a mixture of conversations and sort of discrete chunks of work, or what we called actions, right? So to give you a very simple example, if in a small business of about 10 people, somebody said, should we go out for dinner today, right? Then you'd have these 10 people saying yes or no or maybe, or Indian or Chinese, and all of this conversation would happen. And the person who asked that question had to look at all this conversation, and in between this conversation there would be conversation about sales or conversation about other things, and kind of have to make sense of this. And so we felt like there was this discrete notion in this particular case of a poll, right? And you could ask that question in a poll. Or another thing we found in small businesses was attendance. How do you kind of check for attendance? Sales numbers. Are you hitting sales quotas, right? So very simple, small. It's wrong to call these a workflow because workflow is a very big word, but it's really a simple back and forth. But people would have to really wade through much of WhatsApp conversation to kind of figure out this stuff, right? So that was a gap. The third thing that we found to be a gap was the ability to search effectively, which again we kind of combined it with the second insight of, okay, work is getting done on chat, and are we making it easier to get work done? The third one was a very interesting and I would almost say a controversial insight, which is in the context of WhatsApp, right, or most chat apps even today, the groups are flat. It's very democratic. But when we saw and met customers, small and medium businesses in India, we found that this notion of hierarchy was very strong in business, right? And while we might come with, there are two ways to think about this, of course, as with any design, which is, do we want to nudge people to a more democratic, flat kind of system, or do we want to build for the world that they sort of inhabit, right? And so we said, hey, we need to have this notion of hierarchical groups that helps mirror the business that they are running, right? So the more generic notion was, let's kind of map to the kind of teams and groups that people actually inhabit in their lives and work, rather than forcing it all into a flat group that WhatsApp does, right? So that was, I think, the third big insight. So these were, I would almost say, the three big insights we had around the gaps from WhatsApp. The fourth one, which became really powerful later, was that, and I'll tell you about the journey later, of course, but that became very powerful later was that kind of two related insights, I would say, the fourth and the fifth. The fourth is that identity in India is phone number, right? It's not an email address. Again, WhatsApp got that. But again, 2015 Microsoft, it was all live ID and an outlook.com email address and so on. And so there was no phone number based authentication or identity in Microsoft, right? So that was a big one to kind of say, hey, this is what we want. And the last one was that people work with people outside their organization very freely, right? In a WhatsApp group, you don't have Active Directory and like people being added to Active Directory or all of that notion that's there in Exchange and enterprise or a medium business context. Even in a small business, you add people into a WhatsApp group and then you remove them when they're done, kind of thing. And so how do we have that kind of a directory notion that's so easy to work with? So these were the 5 insights. I'm like amazed I remember it after so many years, but it was very close to my heart. So it was
I'm surprised myself, right? You of course had so much of wisdom in those 4 or 5, and I think I noted most of those. I think one thing which overarchingly is kind of a theme, right? People have a similar objective, no matter the kind of business. It's like getting the job done, right? Like in the simplest of the ways, if you were to think about it, right? Say there's a grocery store or a carpenter shop. They're like, okay, I have received an order. I need to fulfill this order. And during those, let's say, journeys or whatever, there are individual steps which will come in, and that's what you try to automate.
Exactly.
Now, whether that's let's say a multi-billion-dollar startup, they might do it with a Teams and a Slack or whatever else. But here, there is still the same need, right? It's just that maybe not the same level of finesse and polish in some person's lens. But I think that's what most people miss out on. I guess you guys, at least since I saw, were like very honed into this, like we are the voice of that. What is the small and medium business in Indian context? I think there was an expansion eventually in Brazil and a few other markets as well, right?
Absolutely. In fact, that's a very good point, and it's something that I still feel very strongly about. I mean, even before Microsoft, the startup I did, and probably the last 14, 15 years, I've been doing a lot of work in the Indian context, right? Even at Riot Games, right? And so the thing I still feel very passionately about is that the smallest business or the common man should have access to the same kind of technology that big companies have, because their work is the same, right? And so, like, if I say that, oh, you can use so-and-so to-do app, but you need to sign in with a live ID or with a Gmail account, it doesn't make sense in the Indian context. People work on their phones and they want to get the same to-do list or task done, but they can't do it if you sort of impose these constraints, right? And so how do we build in a very democratic way that everybody can actually have access to that same power that larger companies benefit from? It's a tangent, but I think it's a very pertinent conversation even at this time with what we see happening in AI. And I just wish that the democratization of AI happens much more, so that like the poorest people in India have access to it and they're able to benefit from all of that goodness that we might experience with ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or any one of these tools, right? So that still remains like a flame for me that keeps me going. Yeah.
I think another very important point which you mentioned here is when people think about democratization, at least in, say, an Indian context or China or any of those other countries which are not primarily West, right?
Yeah.
The immediate thought or the only thought is often the dollar or the price to it, right?
Yeah.
Oh, if I make this cheap, will the user come? But I think what you're saying is the access is not always equal or not always congruent to the price, right?
Oh,
so
absolutely.
You may have,
in fact, it's almost the other way around, which is we've been talking about this for so long now, which is how do you design products for India that can be successful across the world because they serve that common need, right? Again, success, no success, and we'll talk about that. But I feel so proud about Kaizala that it was a product that was built inside a large company like Microsoft, which is hard, built out of India, which is hard, but built as a product that could serve the world, right? So that I think was just so amazing for us to do.
Okay, amazing. Right. So one question I had, Arun, was around just chat products, right? I mean, of course, all the insights that you laid out make a lot of sense from, if you rewind to 2015, like polls weren't there on WhatsApp, if I remember correctly, right? So that stream of messages which just don't make sense to you is definitely there. I still feel that as a challenge with a lot of work chat, by the way. But there was still Microsoft products, right? Like there was Skype, there was, I think Skype for Business went through several rebrands, but a version of that was there, right? So why build a net new product and of course like on phone instead of like say just take Skype, repurpose it as a mobile app and like move on from there, right? What was the thinking behind that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Again, I remember this very distinctly. So in 2015, December 24th, I remember the date. Right? The day
I'm gonna ask you what's your nutrition routine because my memory needs that.
Yeah. So this was the day before Christmas, 2015. We had launched Connections or Aloha, I think a few days before, and we had an offsite on 24th December to kind of discuss, hey, should we do this Kaizala thing or not, right? Because we had the idea, we had the insights, but as you said, committing to a new chat app is a big thing. And also committing to a new chat app in the context of 1 billion people in India using WhatsApp is like foolhardy almost, right? So it was like, should we do this? And it was kind of funny because I remember we had an outage on Connections. So like the first half of the day, the team was working on the outage. We didn't have our offsite. So, but we spent like the afternoon and evening, well into the evening, talking about this of should we do this or should we not, right? And it boiled down to a very simple thing. And I like the simplicity of it, which is it came down to and I'll give you some context also before I get into that, right? At that time, Microsoft, I think it's still there, but Microsoft had a big investment into what they call the Microsoft Garage, right? So Garage was supposed to be the incubator where you didn't have too many rules, right? And you could go ahead and really incubate. So Connections, Sprightly were all part of Garage, and Kaizala was supposed to be part of Garage. And so we said, hey, let's not think about our internal existing assets in Skype and so on. What we know is that we live in India. We want to build a great mobile product for Microsoft that succeeds in India. Skype is not that product. It is an email-based sign-in. It is an enterprisey product. It isn't a consumer chat product. So that was an easy one to kind of go ahead, cross that sort of, hoop. And then we said, but should we do this when there's WhatsApp? And it just came down to, we've met 500 businesses and we feel it in our bones that we owe something to them. I mean, there is a gap and they are struggling in their lives. So let's just build something. So it started off with this thing of let's build something and let's see what happens. Right? And it's a garage incubation. So that was December 24th. January 22nd, we had an Android build of the first version of the product. Right? February 22nd, we launched our Android version. And I think somewhere in April, second week, we launched our iOS version. So it is the kind of startup energy that you wouldn't find in a big company. The reason I say these dates is not only do I remember them, but it was like, okay, December 24th, we decide. And then like in 4 weeks, we have a basic, really like I would say almost a product that wasn't functioning great, but we had the basic skeleton of what we wanted, right? With some, I think the first action was attendance, and it was chat was there. Chat was using some Skype backend, but we had something working, and we were like, okay, we have a product. Then we went to Seattle, showed this to a few people, and we said, okay, we're going to launch this. Do you have any, it's a garage product? We said, okay, go for it. And Feb 22nd, we had the Android build out. So it was like just incredible energy. So yeah.
Amazing. And just for context, Microsoft Garage is an incubation lab.
Yeah,
similar to how I think Google has Area 120, which is again quite similar. But I think Area 120 is like more committal that way, wherein like you leave your jobs behind and like do a full 2-year commitment, if not more.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Okay, perfect. Okay, so that's good from a perspective like, okay, there are like so many products in the mix, right? So now you have a hypothesis, you've got say 500 odd researchers done, you've launched this Android. Now what happens? Like, how do you, like, say, I don't know, find product market fit, and what exactly is product market fit in this scenario?
Yeah, it's a great question, and something that I've thought about a lot since Kaizala, because I still kind of think about, hey, is that a place I made a mistake as the product lead for this product, right? And I'll give you some context. So February 22nd, we launch. April, we launch iOS. We are seeing we are onboarding some small businesses. They're using the product, they're kind of liking it, and we're like, okay, this is good, but we're not seeing any sort of crazy growth yet, and that's fine. I mean, we're still very, very small, right? Now, what happened, and this is one of those, like the stories that you remember from any kind of startup that does well. So I think it was in July early July, that Rajiv, for context, is right now the managing director for Microsoft in India, and also the CVP for the E&D, or Enterprise and Devices Group, Experiences and Devices Group. Sorry. So I think Rajiv at that time was leading all of Office, and he was, of course, a key. He was a key stakeholder is not the right word, because he put in as much into Kaizala, if not more, than all of us, right? And so, and into the mobile incubation. So he said, hey, let's go and visit these, low-income self-help groups in rural Andhra Pradesh. And we decided to do that visit to see how we can help them with Sprightly, whether we can help some of these self-help groups take their products, create catalogs for them, and publish those directly onto, let's say, Amazon or Flipkart, so that they're able to sell their crafts that they're making.
Yeah.
So we went for this visit. We met with the self-help groups. They really liked Sprightly. And then the person who was showing us around said, hey, this other thing that you have called Kaizala, which we just mentioned, by the way, would you mind waiting for a while? We want you to meet somebody who you can show this to. So we said, yeah, sure. I mean, we have the day. So this was like maybe 3 or 4 in the afternoon. I'm just recounting a story, but it's such a good story.
I was just going to ask, do you not remember the time?
Yeah. It was about 3 in the afternoon. And so we ended up meeting the district collector from Andhra Pradesh. And he said, he was a very tech-savvy gentleman. And he said, hey, this product's really interesting. I want you to come back again to the office the next day and show us more about this product. The reason is, funny story is, all of us had made the trip for the day, so we had no change of clothes, none of that. And I remember that evening going to a shopper stop nearby, buying pants and a shirt and so on. And we found a hotel room, and it was me, Rajiv, there was a couple of other people. We got into this hotel. Next day morning, we go in, and we walk in to the chief minister's office, right? So it was like, oh my God, so somebody looked at Kaizala and said, is this real? Do you actually have chat? Do you actually have hierarchical groups? Do you have all of these actions? And he said, yeah, it's real. I mean, we built this out and we are from Microsoft. So we meet the chief minister. That was the day of the elections, and all of this is happening. And in the afternoon, around maybe 2 o'clock, after waiting a while, he comes and he looks at the product and he says, and this is Chief Minister Chandrababu Naidu, for those who don't know, he's one of the most tech-savvy chief ministers in the country, right? So he said, hey, I love this, and I want to use this to run the Krishna Pushkaram, which was a festival where about 10 million pilgrims were supposed to come for this festival. And the dates were August 7th to August 17th, right? Over 10 days. Okay. This was mid-July. We had built this toy app in some sense that maybe had 5 customers at that time, and probably had scaled to 20, 25 people using it concurrently. And suddenly we had this thing of, okay, 10 million pilgrims coming and we want to roll out this app. And we said, yeah, we'll do this, right? So it was one of those things, going back to your question about product market fit, where we went from being a product for small businesses to suddenly somebody saying, hey, this is really, really useful for very large enterprise-like scenarios, right? And I'll clarify what I mean here a bit because of the product market fit. So to complete the story, long story short, we flew the entire team to Vijayawada during the Krishna Pushkaram from Hyderabad. There were about 20 of us who spent like 15 days there, day and night working on scaling this product, getting it right, getting it to work. It finally wasn't used by pilgrims, but it was used by all the officials, the police department, the health department, to manage this entire event, right? And but still, it was like, thousands, if not of tens of thousands of people using this app suddenly. And we pulled it off. I mean, Krishna Pushkaram was a success. The product was a hit. We suddenly found product market fit, and we found a lot of attention coming our way. And in this time, what we realized, to your question of product market fit, we had started with small and medium businesses. But what we realized is that all large enterprises have hundreds of thousands of gig workers that they work with, right? So initially, we used to draw this circle of small and medium businesses. We expanded that to say the periphery of every enterprise is hundreds and thousands of gig workers, all right? So in the Indian context, you have any large company, you have so many people who still sign into a register, right? Let's say watchmen, delivery boys, people who come to deliver food, people who replace your water, people who aren't on your rolls, but they're still working within the premises of a company, which is kind of what it felt like we had figured out through Krishna Pushkaram, that whether it's governments or very large businesses, they end up working with their customers, with their vendors, with their suppliers who are not on the rolls, but are a very critical part of the business. And Kaizala fits there, right? So that was kind of the discovery that we made. And finally, kind of in October, we said, this is what we are about, right? To take another minute, going back to what I said about, phone number as identity and directory, right? So this is when the directory really kind of blew up as an idea, which is, hey, in addition to Active Directory, which is the enterprise users in your company, every company needs a non-active kind of phone number based directory that is maybe 10 times as big as Active Directory, right? And so that was kind of the insight that we came up with.
That's amazing. I think there's so many takeaways for me here. One is when you start thinking of a product, building a product, right? It's often the splits are more like size of the market, size of the organization. But there's so much of like psychographics here in terms of like, okay, even if it's like a large enterprise, whether it's a government or whatever, it could be within that periphery or like those concentric circles wherein you're in the outer one, right? I mean, I can totally see how a large organization like a Flipkart or an Amazon, they have the same needs, right? Like whether or not they have an in-house tool doing this, at least today, I have no idea. But yeah, I mean, I could totally see that. The other thing, when you were saying all of this, right? Like you mentioned around like we went there, we spoke to people. So that brings an important point around like the whole journey of a product, right? Like the user discovery part, like how do you like really figure out what needs to be done. And I want to bring your book here, which I recently read, and thank you so much for writing that, Arun. So for those of you who don't know, Arun recently published a book called Feeling Well, and in my opinion, it's one of the wisest product management guide and a very humble version of Arun's story. He's a great man and has done a lot of things, but definitely does not like blowing his own trumpet. Yeah, so in the book, right, you mentioned something in the lines of like, to build a muscle for curiosity, there are 3 ingredients. Can you elaborate on that point? Like, what are those 3 ingredients? What is the muscle for curiosity? Why do you need to build it?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because you publish a book and then you don't remember exactly what you said in the book later, though you remember things from 10 years ago.
How do you not remember?
Yeah, but I'll tell you what I feel about it, right? Which is, when you think about the muscle for curiosity in some sense, I think it starts with something very fundamental, which I think everybody can inculcate, which is, I used to tell people way back that, hey, just go sit in a mall and look at people, right? Get curious about people, right? Because I feel that if you're a product manager, you need to start by being a humanist, right? You need to start by enjoying conversations with people, enjoying that thing of observing people, of listening to people, almost with that childlike sense of, hey, what's this person up to, right? Kind of thing, right? So I think that's a very core part of that building the muscle for curiosity. I think the other thing I would say is, there's that quote about how the Lord gave us one mouth and 2 ears. So I think that's how you need to kind of do your work. I think it's really important to listen. It's been spoken about so much, but it's still very true, because many times you go in with preconceived notions, you go in with pre-existing biases. In a large company, you can almost have this pressure for, hey, let's build the product and ship it. So, or your boss has told you, hey, this is what you need to do. And then how do you be curious in that kind of a situation, right? So actually kind of having this viewpoint of that I'm not answerable to anybody but my customer, that I think is very core for a product manager, right? It's not your boss, it's not your promotion, it's not your it's not your engineering manager, it's not any of those things. It is, hey, this person uses my product and I need to listen, or maybe uses a competing product and I need to listen, right? And so I think that's really very core part of the role, I think, in terms of building muscle for curiosity. The last thing I'd say around curiosity is that it's almost like, how do you ask those right questions, right? The thing that I found very useful was just the phrase "tell me more," right? It's like people don't use that at all, but like, and the reason I mention it is this, because again, when I got into Microsoft many years ago, I found that everybody was talking so fast, and I was like, man, I also need to talk really fast. And then I realized that, okay, when I'm with customers, I can really be myself, and I usually speak very slowly. And I felt like, I can actually listen to what they want, what they say. I can be curious. I can say, tell me more. And that becomes a really important tool in terms of how do you ask questions, how do you engage with customers at a level where there's it's a free conversation. Going back to Rajiv, I found that Rajiv was brilliant at this, right? Because the thing that was so nice about him was he was very disarming. Like everybody felt like they can speak to him. And the other thing that was really nice was, and it was really funny because all of us used to kind of cringe a little bit, because sometimes he would just say the most inappropriate things, but it just came from a place of, okay, I'm relating to this person as a human being, and I don't need to be all formal and Microsoft, and I've come from this big company to talk to this small business. He actually made small businesses feel very big, right? And that, I think, is just such a beautiful human ability to have, of making everybody feel very respected and almost feel like, hey, this person is kind of a not very important, right? And so that was just so disarming. But many of the researchers who would accompany us would be like, oh my god, what did Rajiv say, kind of thing, right? But yeah, so I feel like just being very authentic. I know the word authentic is so overused nowadays, but it's really that of having that authentic childlike curiosity. So
Yeah, and of course, I've had the privilege of being in Rajiv's team myself.
yeah.
I think one phrase that comes to mind, at least in Hindi, is seva bhav.
Yeah.
In English, not sure if that's the right translation, but something like being very dedicated or devoted
Or being of
towards
service, right? Being of service.
Yeah, being of service. And I think he was an embodiment of that.
Yeah.
He is an embodiment of that in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
Like he has that seva bhav, that service attire and whatnot, right? Like in terms of like, okay, I am the builder for you.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what my veil is, what my cloak is. I'm just going to be that, right?
Totally.
So, yeah, that's totally. And I think that's the point. Like, how does a product builder, right, whether an engineer, manager, designer, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
How do they inculcate most of that when asking those questions?
Yeah.
I think that's the one, right?
Yeah, the thing I feel about curiosity at the end of the day, right, and like even now what I do is just going and meeting players, and so many players. I think it's one of those things, like when you talk about the muscles for curiosity and what I've written in my book, it's one of those things that you can start small and you can just keep doing, right? So you start, like one of my early managers used to say, get out of the ivory tower of Microsoft, right? And so you just go onto the streets, you go into a mall, you're on a flight, you see somebody using Outlook or you see somebody using WhatsApp, you get into a conversation with them, you chat with them, and you do this 10 times, 15 times, and you just keep getting better at it, right? So it's like, and the thing, Shreyas, and like you mentioned my book, like a lot of my book of sort of failing well came from this place soon after I lost my dad, and I was in this very kind of bleak spot, right? And one thing I really appreciated about Google as well is at that time I got the opportunity to spend a lot of time meeting customers in who were using Android. And every time I would meet customers, I would come back energized, right? Like it was like you just you stop thinking about yourself, you start thinking about other people's concerns, and that's just a great place to be in, where you're, as you said about seva bhav, you just get into the space of, hey, how can I help this person with what they're going through? I still remember this one couple I met in a village outside Mysore, and they had bought one phone between the two of them so that their two daughters could attend Zoom calls during this COVID time, right? So that they can continue their education. And I was like, oh my God, that's what we are doing with Android, right? We are helping people buy inexpensive phones on which things like Zoom and Teams can run, and children can get educated during COVID. It seems like such a obvious thing, or we've heard it so many times, but when you experience it in a small village outside Mysore, a couple pooling in their savings to buy a phone for their daughters, it really hits you. And that's, I think, what product managers meeting customers is about. It's not about research, but it's about passion that you feel in the bones that I need to do this, right? And that's kind of going back to Kaizala. Like after meeting 500 people, we felt that we owed it to our customers to build this, whether there's WhatsApp or Skype or whatever else, we need to do this, right? And so that's
I think that's a really big one, right? Like owing it to the customers, because you could have like simply walked away saying that, okay, 500, what, like in Microsoft context, what is 500? Nothing, right? But yeah, that's it. So switching to the team story, Arun. So of course, like Kaizala is now built, it's gotten product market fit, there's good traction, but now Teams comes around and Kaizala finds a new house. Like, how did that all happen? Can you put those blocks for me together?
Yeah, and let me go through it chronologically, but I'll also tell you this is, what I was saying, one of the places I look back and say, hey, was that a misstep, right? But I'll tell you the story. So again, you remember how I told you in February, we went and did these rounds in Seattle, showing off all of our mobile incubations. And around that time, we had met Brian, who was the leader of Teams. And he said, hey, I'm working on this thing called Teams. And he was very interested in what we were doing with Connections, which was the CRM on the phone, as well as Sprightly. And he said, hey, I'm working on this thing called Teams. And we were like, yeah, that's great. We didn't pay much attention to it. I think fast forward to September, October, what I was mentioning, when we found product market fit. At that time, I think what we did, and this is still not Teams time, right? But at this time, what happened was we started thinking, okay, we found product market fit with enterprises who need a chat app for their gig workers. They have these hierarchical groups and divisions and all of that. They need an open directory, which is phone number based, right? So all of our pieces are fitting well. And so how do we really scale this, right? And when you think about how does Microsoft scale a product, the thing that Microsoft has, which no other company has, and I think it's been what has resulted in the rediscovery and growth of Microsoft, is that entire enterprise sales engine, right? And so we said, hey, maybe we should be part of Microsoft 365, right? Because Microsoft 365 sells to enterprises, and let's add Kaizala. So I think this is where we started experimenting in India with a very, very supportive sales org in India, right? So the Microsoft, I don't think like before or after Kaizala, the Microsoft India sales, the enterprise sales division and product division have worked so closely together, right? Because it was, both of us found that whether it's State Bank of India or whether it's Indian Railways or whether it's any of these large enterprises that you find in India, all of them wanted Kaizala, right? And so we said, hey, let's make this part of Microsoft 365. So it took a long time for us to get a SKU that was a Microsoft 365 SKU for these enterprise customers, which included Kaizala, and we started seeing huge growth, right? So this was, I think, the success story in some sense of Kaizala not only finding product market fit, but finding a growth engine that exists in Microsoft that we can kind of be part of, right? Now, to kind of contrast this with Teams, at about this time, Teams was starting to happen. And I think, as all of us know, I think Teams took a lot of inspiration from the growth of Slack, especially with startups in the Valley and startups in the US. And I won't say we were unaware, but we were like, okay, like Teams is focusing on chat and work in the context of startups in the US. we are looking at gig workers in India. I mean, they aren't the same. They are like
Yeah.
different, right? And so the needs of these audiences are different. The kind of especially on the directory phone number, right? All of this is different, right? And teams started to happen, and teams started to see a lot of growth. Around this time, by the way, to also share more, is in Microsoft, we saw on Azure the growth of chatbots, right? And also there was a white paper around that time about chat as a service or chat platform as a service, and chat is very foundational to work, right? And so there was Skype, there was Teams, there was Kaizala, there was the API service on Azure, right? So there was multiple people who were starting to look at chat as a new user interaction paradigm for customers, right? So it was like almost like, hey, you used to have the GUI metaphor, and now you have the chat metaphor, right? And it was almost like that, right? And so we were like, okay, everybody's part of this party, and so we are also part of this party, right? And so it was all good. But I think as time went on, Teams was coming almost from the core enterprise outwards towards gig work, right? And we were going from gig work from the periphery. We were hoping to do more and more inwards towards the core, right? With Kaizala. Also, from a paradigm standpoint and from a sizing standpoint, I felt that, wow, WhatsApp is billions of people, right? Slack is small, right? So why wouldn't you naturally go after the big opportunity, right? And so that's kind of the other thing that was on my mind, that hey, we should really, we're Microsoft, we can take on WhatsApp, right? And so that was kind of, I would say, almost hubris on my part of saying, hey, this is something we can do, and we have the product for it. So, but this was kind of what was on my mind, I would say. Long story short, I think Teams continued to grow and do well, and Kaizala continued to do well. We were tackling different scenarios, but if you kind of take yourself away from the product manager focus of what this product does, and maybe I'll take a minute to talk about that after this, and then kind of go to a sales or a marketing standpoint, you're like, hey, both of these are chat apps from Microsoft, right? And so which one should I use? And we started to hear that from enterprise customers. And at that time, I think we had a number of conversations that I feel were tough at that time, but very rational, definitely, in Microsoft. I really appreciate sort of Microsoft and the leadership for how objective and pleasant these conversations were. They were tough conversations, but they were never bad conversations. But we had this conversation, and we all kind of said, hey, maybe we should all be putting our energy behind this, this growth that Teams is seeing, right? Teams fits much better with our enterprise suite of products. It is much more focused on enterprise. It is starting to happen on mobile. It will eventually get to gig work. We will eventually have a lot of these. What we had pioneered in Kaizala was a very simple way to build out lightweight actions in Kaizala for third parties, very similar to the WeChat model. And so that's something that we could have in Teams someday. So a lot of the assets of Kaizala are valuable to Teams, but the brand that we need to be behind and the single purpose that Microsoft needs to get behind is Teams as the chat platform, right? And so that's kind of when we decided that we need to sort of divest from Kaizala and see how those assets make sense in the context of Teams. For me, it was a tough time, but I think it was really, now looking back and seeing the growth of Teams, it's really played out very well for Microsoft. So I think it was tough for me, but it was the right call. So that's kind of how I feel about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and also the thing you said about like WhatsApp versus
Yeah.
The other market, right? Enterprise. I think that's also kind of true to, in some sense, ethos of Microsoft.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, we've always seen, or everybody sees Microsoft as an enterprise company,
Mm-hmm.
no matter how much consumer footing there might be with, of course, a few products here and there, right?
I mean, and I mentioned I'll come back to something later, but this is just kind of maybe going ahead in my journey. But now that I'm in Riot, right, I look a lot at marketing and biz dev. And one of the things I've learned, you learn it in theory, it's different, and then you do it, it's different. But one of the things I've learned in sort of marketing is the simplicity of one message that consumers can take away, right? And having that very, very, very simple, clear, singular message is super important from a marketing positioning, from a marketing clarity standpoint. And so now when I take my, they have these things of what advice would you give your 20-year-old self or whatever, right? So if I put myself 7-8 years back, I think the advice I would give is, yeah, it's true. I mean, you can't have two chat apps from Microsoft. Consumers will just think, chat, oh, that's Teams, or chat, that's Kaizala, and you don't want to sort of bifurcate that. So I totally appreciate sort of the decision we made now in retrospect. At that time, it's really hard, but yeah.
Understandable. Yeah, I mean, I was doing some rough math, and like 7-8 years ago, 20 years, and like, Arun, are you 28?
No, I was
I
definitely
know.
making myself look younger than I really am.
I mean, your memory is definitely trumping mine right now. So, well, okay. So, there's one thing which I like asking quite a lot. Any Eureka moments? Of course, you've had like many. I know one that like sticks out for you, wherein customers just went wow with like one tiny change or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many to pick from, but I think for us, I'll give you a slightly nuanced answer. But when we started Kaizala, we thought these multi-level hierarchical groups would be the Eureka, because of how chat in the Indian context is not necessarily democratic. There's all this one-way conversation. It's also what WhatsApp has now in terms of communities and so on, right? And by the way, the innovation there was not only multi-level groups, but we said WhatsApp had a limit of 256. We said we have no limit, right? So it was crazy. We had no limit because we hadn't measured what it was, but we said we can have a group with 10,000 people if you want, right? And then how do those chat mechanics change? How does it become one way? All of that, right? So we thought that's going to be really resonant with customers. But as time went by, the Eureka that happened in a very long conversation with Deepak Pratinidhi, who is our CVP of engineering right now. Again, a really brilliant guy, a really great guy to hang out with, very passionate. We had a long conversation about this, and we said, wow, this directory that we have, that is an open directory with phone numbers, that could be bigger than Active Directory. And that was for us a Eureka moment. It just felt so much like, I mean, now there's Okta and so many other things in that space, but the Eureka was that we have really found that enterprises have 10x more people that they work with outside their company than inside. And that's something that we don't have in Active Directory. So from a Microsoft standpoint, that was a real big one. So I felt that was, it just, I felt goosebumps then when I understood what Deepak was trying to tell me finally.
Yeah. No, okay. All right. So the final last question, Arun. You've of course have a plethora of experience, and you've done so many things, right? What advice do you have for people who are like trying to build, right? And I definitely want to hear this from you, because you've been at that polymorphic position of, you've written code. I know you like getting your hands dirty. You've of course done immense amount of product management. You're a good designer as well. So yeah, what is that one advice which you'd give to like product builders in any of these three roles?
Yeah. You mean other than the advice of read my book? But yeah.
Yeah, that is like an action-packed 200 page. Yeah.
Yeah, but the thing that I feel, and now like I've been working for so many years, the thing that I feel is, I would say, never stop trying. I mean, like, the thing that I feel strongly about is, it is the title of my book, which is Failing Well. And I think as product managers, as engineers, there's so many times that we fail. And what we hear about are the success stories, right? We hear about, oh, this one person who did this thing and they built a great product, or they made so much money. But then when you start realizing that the joy is in the building, and the joy is in the getting up and building again, and then getting up and building again, and that's why you got into this in the first place. And then that keeps you going, right? And so for me, that's really the one thing that I feel strongly about now, which is, I know that 20 years from now, I'll still be working on some product or still trying to do something. I have so many side hustles right now that I keep thinking I need to build this product, or I have this product idea. My wife tells me all the time that, you keep going off and having these crazy product ideas. When are you going to build them, right? And so it's just one of those things that when you enjoy the building process, you kind of go back and say, hey, why did I take up this job? And you know that computer code or computer products are things that you can build with so little cost, and it gives you that joy of building. Then I think you kind of stay true to the path of just getting up and doing it again, and going for it again, and going for the next shot, whether you fail or succeed. So yeah, I would just say, stay in the game, keep trying, keep at it. Yeah.
Amazing. A lot of that is basically also the ethos of my channel.
Yeah.
So which is also nice to see. Again, Arun, that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you so much. Again, I've learned from you over the years, and any conversations are always great. Lots and lots of good takeaways. But again, thank you for being a part of today's episode at Building It Big.
Hey, thanks so much, Shreyas. It was a pleasure chatting with you as always. And yeah, we should do this again sometime.